If it's a little bit more complex or the person doesn't feel comfortable really talking to their roommate in person, then as an RA or an ARD, I would go in with them and work to mediate that conversation. And so that can look like a lot of different things, but essentially what we do is help to empower the roommates to have a conversation themselves and just act as someone who is there to support and to help guide the conversation if it turns into like an attack versus trying to have a real conversation and work through it together.
So RAs are trained in the type of mediation resolution between residents, particularly in roommate conflicts. They've also had experience dealing with those particular conflicts in the past as well. And the way every RA will probably do it differently, but in my experience when I was an RA, my mediations typically would result in me asking, like, first setting some ground rules about how the mediation's going to go. No raised voices, I feel statements, to take turns, no interrupting each other, and then I go through each side's story and then ask them how they feel about hearing the other person's story, and then asking them if there's a possibility of resolving this conflict between the two of them besides moving out, unless they for some reason feel that there's some other difference that they can't resolve. Typically, RAs will also be equipped with your roommate agreement, which you should be filling out at the beginning of the year as well, and so that can be a good resource to refer back to as well, and the RAs have that all worked out. And that usually helps them come to either like some sort of like contract or compromise, in which case that would be written down, preferably, agreed upon by both roommates, and then typically the RA would maybe go in and check in after a week or so to see how that agreement is working out.
I would definitely say that your RA is more than happy to work with you in whatever you're kind of going through. And that's kind of what their job is. You should never feel like it's a burden to your RA to come to them and say like, hi, like I'm having a hard time with my roommate, or like, I feel like I'm having a hard time kind of figuring out where I belong on campus. And ultimately your RA is there to get to know you and to support you in whatever way that they can. And if you're not engaging with your RA, it's really hard for them to do that, and it's hard for you when you feel like you don't have that relationship with your RA. But if you kind of set that relationship at the beginning, it's much easier to say, okay, like this is going on, I feel like I can talk to my RA about it because they know who I am as a person.
I think your RA is a really great resource for just kind of going to them and being like, I'm not sure how to say this to my roommate, I'm not sure how to word this, I don't know how to say this without offending them, I don't know how to say this without sounding mean or whatever. And I think just kind of doing like a run with like practicing with your RA is a good idea, because they can tell you kind of like what kinds of statements are more coming from a place of active listening and understanding, and like what kinds of words help better to solve a conflict. And I think that also just having them hear you out, they're a really great resource also if you just want to talk about the things that you're going through, because they will just be there to listen, and they understand what it's like to live with a roommate in a dorm, that kind of stuff. And then in terms of conflict mediation, an RA is great because we are not biased, and we are coming from a place where we want everybody to get along and we want everybody to feel really good where they're living. And so if you feel like the conflict is kind of getting out of hand and you feel like you're kind of losing control of it a little bit, or if things are just escalating in a way that you don't feel super comfortable with, then talking to your RA is really good. And just having them, it's great because it's kind of this point of authority where they can set up a meeting with the roommate or with whoever you're having a conflict with, and just kind of sit there with the both of you and create this kind of like interaction in which one person gets to talk and then the other person gets to talk, and then that way you're really hearing each other out, and it's not about like who's right and who's wrong. It's about like, how can we come to a solution that works out best for the both of you, or come up with a compromise. I think that's also really good. Sometimes when you're kind of like heated in a conflict, it's hard to come up with compromises because you're just thinking about like maybe the injustices that have been done to you. But I think that an RA is really good at just kind of coming to a compromise and making sure that both parties are happy.
All the residents that come in are from different backgrounds. There's different standards, different cultures that people have, And so being able to reach out to us, and if somebody, let's say, has social anxiety and would never ever want to reach out to their resident to talk about a certain conflict, they can definitely bring that up to us. And again, we can, someone like me who's an RA can play that middle person role in between the two, and I can bring that up to that resident. And I think what's really important is after a conflict is resolved, or if a conflict is still ongoing, to make sure to do some follow-up as well, to make sure that this conflict is absolutely resolved and that everything is being done to make sure that we're solving the conflict. Because some people might feel like, oh, well, the conflict has been talked about, but it may actually not be resolved, but they don't want to bring it up because they don't want to burden maybe an RA or burden their roommate. And so I think being honest is very important, and making sure that people have that space to do so. If you're going to have a conflict linger, it's a lot more worse than if you are honest about it and upfront and saying, hey, maybe we can tweak a certain thing to make sure that this conflict is legitimately resolved.